This edition of our podcast is brought to you by 360 Health and Well Balanced Nutrition.
Welcome to the Heath Geeks Book Club podcast. Listen in as Kristen Norton and Eleanor Russell review all those great health and wellness books you've been wanting to read or you have read and want to talk about. Here's Kristen and Eleanor.
Hey everyone, we are back in the studio for our first book of the spring season. We are talking about Outlive, The Science and Art of Longevity by Peter Attia, MD, with Bill Gifford, Rethinking Medicine to Live Better Longer.
Hey, if you're as interested in prevention as I am, contact me, Eleanor Russell, at 360health4u.com. Whether you're interested in financial wellness or physical health products, 360 Health invites you to become part of our community.
Do you want to live longer?
Oh, yeah. I've always told people I'm going to live to 120, and they think I'm nuts. Like, why would you want to live that long?
My birth certificate does not have an expiration date.
Correct.
Oh, I like that.
We used to say in the morgue, nobody comes with a toe tag when you're born.
That's right.
You know.
Well, I want to live long, but I want to live a long, healthy life.
Oh, I think that is the distinguishing factor there. No one wants to live 60 years beyond where they were suffering the whole time.
Yes.
No. Hey, listen, this book, Outlive, is Dr. Peter Attia. Mm-hmm. I'm thinking that I might get to meet him this year. He's going to be at a conference that I might go to in Dallas. Should I go to Dallas?
Yes.
Yes, that's so exciting.
Really? It's my birthday. I don't know.
Well, then
I'll be
absolutely.
working on my birthday.
That's not work. That's fun. You get to see
okay. All right.
Peter
Good.
Attia.
Well, anyway, this just a little bit about
And
him.
if this goes well, you'll have many other birthdays.
Oh, yeah. So
Thanks to this advice
there's
here.
a point.
Yeah.
Are you all having a birthday this year?
I plan on it.
Every year.
Okay, good. Some people get to where they don't even like to acknowledge that anymore. And I'm thinking, what are you talking about? It's time for a party.
Yeah, I saw something so cool on social media that was like, if we just exchanged age with the word level, like...
I've reached it.
I'm at level 40.
I like that.
Yeah.
That's good.
Yeah. I mean, research shows those with the most birthdays live the longest.
Research
Does
shows.
it? Is that evidence-based?
It is.
Okay.
And death is still the number one killer in this country.
Is it? No way.
Yep.
Wow, I'm so glad we heard
All
that
right.
this morning. Well, that's going to come in here in a minute because we're going to talk about the four horsemen of death. But before we get there, I just wanted to mention that this book is a substantial treatise.
Oh, it's thick.
Oh, but I mean, it's good. I would recommend
good.
this. Would you recommend this?
Highly.
Yeah. And we've read another book on longevity, the Lifespan book by David Sinclair.
I was not a fan per se of that one.
Well, I think what you get into is the style of the authorship. But anyway,
Sure,
they're in that same wheelhouse of what interests them and what grabs their attention for their career. But this fella is an MD. But he has kind of an interesting journey because he was maybe a difficult child and did some volunteering. He thought he might go one way with his career, but his volunteer experience took him to say, no, I think I want to care for people. And so he went into medicine. But then he got disenchanted with the practice of medicine in this country, and he calls it Medicine 2.0, and we'll talk more about that. But then he said, I'm out, and I'm going to go into the financial world. And so he worked in finance for a while and learned some other approach to the world based on risk assessment.
Yeah, he's a numbers guy.
Yeah.
And so he's always doing these calculations around risk.
Right. And so then he comes back to practice medicine with that whole new constellation of stuff and brings this idea about let's redesign the system to medicine 3.0. But the publishers that have, and he is a numbers facts guy, technical writer, and he says this book, he started like in 2015, and it took a torturous journey to get it to publication because it just sat around and
he went through some things.
He didn't follow up and do what he was supposed to do, and the publishers were saying, forget it, But anyway, someone in there said, you need a translator. And so this guy, Bill Gifford, who also is acknowledged as with authorship, is the fellow that I think brought the personality, got it out of this author.
Right.
So that we know more about who he is and what his struggles were, and tells a story that we can read instead of a journal article about longevity.
And I think they did a fantastic job.
They did. They really did. what he talks about as the Harmony Publishing House is the one that has published this book, and that's an imprint of Crown Publishing. But once again, that comes under that huge umbrella of Penguin Random House Publishing. And I think the evidence is that publishing structure gave him the support he needed and the counsel and the editorial help, that he had the idea, but he needed this team behind him. So kudos to the publishers that helped him do this, because I think he's brought a great story to the public.
Yes.
That we can understand. And I'm going to go just a minute more. And so he, in his author's note, he says, writing about science and medicine for the public requires striking a balance between brevity and nuance, rigor and readability. I've done my best to find the sweet spot on that continuum, getting the substance right while keeping this book accessible to the lay reader. You be the judge of whether or not I hit the target. And I think he hit the target.
I do too. So in order for me to be engaged or, follow up with a book, it does have to have that story and that personality behind it. Now, with that said, there are some parts in the book that you have to be kind of a health geek about to enjoy or to understand, because he goes into, the history of, how we feel about heart disease and what is the evidence, and this is why this is happening. Yeah.
I'm against it. I'm not for heart disease.
I know. We don't want you to have
That's not what I meant.
You don't need that in there.
Wrong.
Well, Bill Gifford wrote a book called Spring Chicken. And it made me think of another book we've read, because it's the story of rapamycin. Mm-hmm. And so rapamycin was a key thing that we found in The Switch by Clement, I think is the author's name, and that thing called mTOR. So that gets us to sort of stuff that some of us geeks like to get into. Sure. The lay public may have to kind of wade through that a little bit. But I thought it was an interesting partnership between Bill Gifford and Attia that, from his interest as well on what is this longevity thing about.
Yeah, I didn't know he had a book.
Yeah, Spring Chicken. And this is spring, y'all. At least here, right now, the day that we're recording this is the first day of spring, 2024. Right.
Well, let me tell you a little bit about Peter, a little bit more. Mm-hmm. So he's the founder of Early Medicine. He received his medical degree from Stanford University School of Medicine and trained at Johns Hopkins Hospital in general surgery.
Wow.
He also trained at the NIH as a surgical oncology fellow
at
the National Cancer Institute. And then he serves on the editorial board of the journal Aging and is the host of a popular podcast, The Drive, where he interviews several other
experts
in the top of their careers.
Sounds like he knows what he's talking about.
It's an impeccable CV.
Yeah.
And have you looked at the podcast?
Yeah, I've listened to one or two.
Yeah, I did too. I thought, well, I'm going to check it out. Since we're in podcasting, let's see what he's doing. And he has some great guests, very personable.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about those 4 horsemen, because he says his goal is to live without disease, which is that idea that even in the telomere effect by Elizabeth Blackburn and the work by David Sinclair, I was introduced to the idea if you've got a lifespan, but you can divide it into a health span and a disease span, or they also call that something else, area of mortality. The decade of mortality is the decline in your health, and sometimes that's a decade or 2 decades for some people. But what a lot of people suggest is be alive as long as you live. That was one of my early mentors from the 60s. That was his motto, be alive as long as you live, fully engaged, enjoying life, doing the things that matter. And then die, just die. So live without disease. And so what a lot of us are struggling with in the American culture, and probably around the world too, is chronic disease. And he divides those into 4 common horsemen, as he refers to them, and that's heart disease, cancer, neurodegenerative disease, and this thing called metabolic dysfunction, which a lot of us are paying more attention to now than ever before.
Yeah. Oh, and this kind of brings us into the breakdown of what he calls medicine 1.0, 2.0, and 3.0.
Yeah, what's 1.0? That's a good one.
Yeah, so Hippocrates, and his major contribution just to bring us to the reality that diseases are caused by nature, not actions of the gods.
Yeah, there you go. And he kind of did a lot of guesswork with that, didn't he?
Yeah, but
Like
he
what
got
to
a
do.
little bit right. Like walking is something he encouraged, food as medicine. But there was no such thing as scientific method. Pretty sketch tools were used and practices and procedures. They had no concept of germs. So
Yeah,
that's
but then
fun.
that kind of when that came along, the germ theory of disease, then our author's saying that's where we get to medicine 2.0.
2.0. Yeah. So mid 19th century, this germ theory came about. And this has been in our books and a couple of them, and I always really smile and enjoy this. Like the fact that even germs, when we didn't know that they were a thing, people thought that these doctors were crazy for the thought that, hey, there's something on our hands that we're transmitting to other people.
Oh yeah, that
and
story
killing
about
them.
the fella back in the 1500s or something. He saw a lot of the women were dying in the maternity ward, and he thought, well, maybe it's because we just were over in the autopsy suite and we came over here and move something from there to these patients that was killing them. And when they stopped doing that, the patients got a lot better course of their journey.
Yeah, but for whatever reason, when he tried to express that idea, they're like, you're crazy. And he ended up dying in the insane asylum. So, but
Why do we do that to forward thinkers?
I don't know.
Because we still do that.
Yeah.
And we've seen that like over these fascinating stories in these books.
Well, and, Peter's kind of on the edge of that. He calls it evidence-informed medicine, which is a little bit different than evidence-based
Yes, it is.
medicine, because he's taking what we know from evidence and then trying to apply it to the individual. And that's where he calls it the art, not just the science of longevity, because you do have to be kind of forward thinking about, well, the evidence might not be here yet, but, we can, based on risk, right, decide whether it's better to do nothing or try something.
Oh, you're making me think of that story he told about the stab victim. Do you remember that?
Oh, tell us.
It was a young 17-year-old or something that had a stab wound and came into the ER. And anybody that knows anything about ER docs, it's like amazing. They have to think on their feet, like boom, boom. Anyway, they needed a picture, so they were going to send him up to the imaging suite or to the OR, and from the ER to the better place to take care of this patient according to protocols and what they should do. But he said, I saw the crash coming, and I think he was in the elevator, and he opens this kid up, and what happened was the space around the heart was filling with blood, and that's a very tight chamber, and if it fills up, it stops the heartbeat, and it happens like within seconds. And so he decided, against what everybody would say would be good practice, to open this kid up and relieve that pressure, save the kid's life. He went on, and he said that was a risk-based analysis, benefit cost. Maybe I'd kill him, by doing that, or maybe I would save him. But it was that informed art and the moment and decision, and he did it. He took action.
Yeah. Yeah, I appreciate that whole concept. And I appreciate the stories he tells us
Oh,
like
yeah,
this.
yeah. And that's what I think is really fascinating.
Yeah,
about the
like
book.
what you were saying in the beginning, how maybe if
It would have been really technical.
if it weren't for Bill.
Yeah, good old Bill.
Yeah. But we get to little insights of what Peter's medical training was like and different patients that were impactful to him. So that really made the book entertaining.
Well, what you since we're doing Medicine 1.0 and 2.0, what about 3.0?
Well, let me back up
Oh.
to 2.0.
Okay.
So that is when we started thinking about the scientific theory, no longer guessing, but testing over and over to determine if that guess was correct. So this is where 2.0 comes in. But kind of as we were talking about risk versus evidence, currently, despite a ton of new knowledge and many advancements, Medicine 2.0 is really good at keeping us alive and fixing acute problems, replacing organs and treating symptoms, but as Peter says, really bad at helping us with the horsemen. And Peter argues that Medicine 2.0 intervenes at the wrong point in time, well after the disease has taken hold. So, example, lung cancer treatments versus smoking cessation. We know that lung cancer treatments are far less effective than if we just helped everybody stop smoking. So that's kind of where he sets up 2.0. That's where we're at now, and he wants to bring in medicine 3.0. Would you add anything to that?
Yeah, I think I would. Didn't he have a dream when he was in medical school about eggs falling from the sky?
Yeah, that's a good one to share.
Yeah, because I think that's took him to this idea. So he's dreaming that he can't catch all these eggs and they're breaking, and it's just it's a terrible nightmare. Mm-hmm. Through his journey, he's decided, medicine 2.0 is trying to catch the eggs, and after they've started falling, he has this brilliant idea. Hey, why don't we go to the top of the roof, find the guy that's throwing the eggs out, and take him out? So
get to the root of the problem here.
Right, which is, I think, brilliant. And that's why I am such an advocate for prevention. And what he's telling us in this book is we're waiting way too long to get that message to ourselves.
Yes.
Because after we're 50 and decide, prevention's the way to go, some of these things have already taken hold. So that's not you still start at 50. That's good. But if we can help other people and our medical or healthcare system, which he says is not going to take this task on, help get better behaviors into our life, we would be well served. Mm-hmm. Because he says death can come at two speeds, fast or slow. And he doesn't actually like the word longevity.
What does he like?
Well, I'm not sure, but he says it doesn't mean living forever, and it has two components. How long you live is your lifespan. How well you live is your health span. But looking at just increasing the quality of your life is what he's looking at.
Yeah. And
maybe not how long you live, but how good you live.
That makes me think of the telomere book that we read, because that was really the first time we discussed health span versus the lifespan.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So can I share Sophie's story? Because this was impactful for me.
Okay.
Do you remember Sophie?
Remind me.
Sophie was a friend of, or a friend of his mom. Is that right? Mm-hmm. Okay. So the last 10 years of Sophie's life were not a happy time. She was into gardening and into golf, and then she had a fall, I think, taking care of her garden. And the last couple decades of her life, if I remember, were just kind of sad. And she fell into a depression because she really couldn't do anything after that injury. And this is one of the stories that really inspires Peter to prevent people from having the last couple decades of their life not be a happy time. So Peter stresses the need to think about and plan for later decades of our lives, 70s, 80s, 90s, and beyond. This was really impactful for me. He says, what do you want to do later in life? Travel, hike, golf, simply be active and engage with your grandkids, whatever it is. If you want to enjoy a healthy, rewarding life in later years, you will have to maintain and even improve your physical and cognitive function every decade between now and then. Like, I don't know about you, but that was just a big wake-up call, because we're probably all like, well, I'm pretty decent. I'm fine. I can do these things. But he's pointing out, thanks to being a numbers guy, right, that in order to do those things that we want to do, we're going to need a certain level of muscular strength and aerobic fitness. But even right now, if you think about it, it might not even be sufficient to do those things, and they are virtually certain to decline from there each decade. So, I'm like, okay, I got to work on my balance. I got to work on my aerobic fitness. I don't know, y'all, that was just big for me.
Well, you're talking about Sophie, Madame Calment in France lived to 117, and theoretically she's the longest living person we know of, maybe. And she had a sense of humor, and she was a smoker, and she lives to 117, but she rode her bicycle every day until she was 100. So, not everyone has the Sophie story.
2 pounds of bacon a week.
Probably, yeah. A lot of the centenarians, some of those have interesting
Are you saying that some people just have good genes?
No, I mean, she was active. She was riding her bicycle,
okay.
and that's stability and strength and other things you just mentioned, because you're balancing too, and you're using to stabilize your muscles. But he does say the best medicine we have is exercise,
Yeah.
and I'm an advocate for that as well. I think that's true. That doesn't mean you have to be an obsessive compulsive exerciser, but you got to move your bodies.
Tired of feeling stuck in your health journey? At Well Balanced Nutrition, we understand that achieving your health goals isn't just about what you eat. It's about overcoming the mental roadblocks holding you back. Our team of expert nutrition coaches is here to guide you every step of the way, helping you break through mindset barriers and reach your full potential. Don't let mindset barriers stand in the way of your health and happiness. Call Well Balanced Nutrition today and start your journey to a better you. I agree that moving our bodies is so important. And in high school and college, I was in sports, and that really helped me stay active.
Yeah, and that's the more the better. At that point in your life, you were doing more.
Yeah.
And you were better.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to suggest you're not better now.
Oh. Well, I've been inspired for a new better.
Mm-hmm.
He calls it the centenarian decathlon.
Mm-hmm.
What in the world is that? He says, I'm not talking about an actual competition among 100-year-olds, although similar events do already exist. The Centenarian Decathlon is a framework I use to organize my patients' physical aspirations for their later decades of their lives, especially their marginal decade.
So why don't you tell us, I think he has a little list of things that we could do. Physical
The
tasks.
physical tasks that might be important. So a hike 1.5 miles on a hilly trail. Get up off the floor under your own power.
Okay, sidebar there. I went to he has a video clip on how to do Barry Get Up, the Barry Get Up.
Oh,
which
yeah?
is you're on the floor, and he says a lot of older folks cannot get up off the floor very easily.
True.
So he has a trainer show you how to get up off the floor and practice it, and it's I've used this in some of my networking groups talking about the sit to stand test.
Is this on YouTube?
Yep, it's on YouTube at the PeterAttia.com.
Okay.
/videos. He's got several of these, but it's worth checking out because you do need to know how to get up off the floor. So I'm sorry.
That was a good interrupt. Okay. Pick up a young child from the floor.
Oh, my grandkids, yes.
Carry 2 5-pound bags of groceries for 5 blocks.
Not too interested in that.
That's a lot. Lift a 20-pound suitcase into the overhead compartment of a plane.
Yeah, I'm ready to take a trip.
Yep.
So I'll put 20 pounds in my bag.
Balance on one leg for 30 seconds, eyes open. Bonus points if you can close your eyes for 15 seconds. Have sex. Climb 4 flights of stairs in 3 minutes. Open a jar. And do 30 consecutive jump rope skips.
Yeah. I'm sorry that Tim didn't hear that list. He might have had a comment.
I'm sure he would have. But the full list is much longer. But, that makes you think about the things that you would want to easily be able to do in your later years.
And that's what I say about being fully engaged in life. If you can't do some of that stuff, you can't go places, you can't be with people. All that's limiting. Mm-hmm. And when we get limited, we get isolated. When we get isolated, it's a risk factor for decline. But moving's not the whole gist of this book. It's not an exercise book. It's just his wonderful idea that we can become obsessed with healthy habits and take them to extremes, where we just need to build this into our natural rhythm. Just design an environment or a life that will allow these things to happen, and we'll be happier and healthier and live longer. And he talks about nutrition, and he talks about it as not necessarily the very first thing we need to address. Yeah,
I appreciated the chapter on, he calls nutritional biochemistry.
Oh, yeah. Dare we go into this? Because there's some really good things to ponder, and I was actually wanting to know what your opinion about this was. So can we go there?
Sure.
He talks about the quality of nutritional research. Mm-hmm. And I would tend to agree with him because he says you have clinical trials and you have epidemiology. And so he looks at both angles of that and talks about the weaknesses in them. It's not flaws, it's weaknesses. And what I always counter my attitude about this is it's the best we've got right now. We don't have better information.
Right, we've got to go with what we have.
Yeah, and let's continue to invest in nutritional research and find more and revise our opinions if we need to. Then that'll be good for all of us. We will learn more. But he comes down to just saying that since they're small studies and they're observational studies and they're not for long duration, and maybe their ways to strengthen
population level too.
Yeah, and he pans the Women's Health Initiative. Which surprised me, and I thought, okay. But he has some really good information in this chapter. But what he comes down to, which I think we can agree with after you give your opinion, is you want to find out if you're under or overnourished, and if you're under or over-muscled, and are you metabolically healthy? And then we can customize individual things for those needs. It's not a one-size-fits-all when you start talking about nutrition.
Right.
Do you want to say anything about how he slammed nutrition and wants to call it nutritional biochemistry?
Well, I mean, I think he's got a really great point that we only know so much from these population type studies. And, he's saying your nutrition goals depend on your individual risk profile, right? So he's going to look at everything. And that's what I do as a dietitian, right? I need to know your medical history. I need to know your lifestyle. And then we're going to talk about recommendations. So I appreciate his individual approach. I appreciate his talk on muscle mass and how important that is and how most of us are not getting enough protein.
I can help with that.
There's
by the
only
way.
one thing in here that I didn't really agree with 100%. And that's like in the sleep section, he has that you shouldn't eat 3 hours before bed. And while I do think it's not best to have a really large meal before bed, I just don't think that there's any...
Oh, interesting you bring that up, because there was something in here that I found pertinent to somebody I know. They were telling me they had a glucose spike in the middle of the night, and they couldn't figure that out. And I said, well, are you drinking and eating late in the evening? Because he does talk about that in here, and I had just read it, and I thought, well, that's an interesting thing, because we are, according to, our journey with Eschape, or whatever her name is, the glucose goddess, that spiking glucose is not good for us.
Right.
We need to keep it in within range.
Well, was that person eating late at night?
Yes, they were. And they were drinking alcohol late at night.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, he
Which is
also
sugar-related.
Peter also points out that if you're having blood sugar spikes in the middle of the night, it could be stress related.
Yeah.
So that was big for me because that wasn't necessarily something that I was aware of.
Yeah. So, and that's the individual thing. But and I do want to get to the labs he recommends. But on this nutrition thing, he has this idea in this book about strategies and tactics, and I kind of like that. Looking at the difference in that, but some of the tactics he has to approach, if you're undernourished or overnourished, or if you're undermuscled or overmuscled, but is you have restrictions. You have calorie restrictions, you have dietary restrictions, you have time restrictions. And you were just mentioning the time restriction maybe on the sleep issue. And I thought that was helpful to kind of see. He kind of puts some shape and form to the ideas he's working with. And I found that helpful.
I do too.
Yeah.
He's using more extreme approaches for more overnourished folks. Just as a registered dietitian, there's we got to be careful with disordered eating and eating disorders.
Absolutely.
There. But yeah, I think that for the most part, I agree with his approaches. What were you going to say?
I just made me think of another book we read, and I'm trying to think of which one it was, about Hara Hachibu.
Yeah.
Was that the Blue Zones?
That's Blue Zones.
Yeah.
I love that.
And he talks about that here, too, as,
I just want to hear you say it again.
Hara Hachibu.
Hara Hachibu.
Did I say it right?
I guess.
Because my grandson's taking Japanese, and I said sushi the other day, and he says, it's sushi. It's not sushi, it's sushi. So,
well, just a reminder that Hara Hachibu means to
Yes.
stop at 80% full. So not eating to the point where you're 100% full, and then later you're stuffed because you give
Because your brain didn't catch up with your stomach.
Exactly.
Yeah, and the idea that he said is if you're having trouble with this, just make yourself a cup of tea while your guests are still eating their meal. If they're not going to stop when you stop, just keep the conversation going, but just change your thing over to the tea. And I thought, well, that was a helpful little, okay, how do I really do this when I'm out with everybody and we're all enjoying this wonderful food that just my mouth is going crazy about, but my stomach probably can't hold, but I'm going to put it in there anyway. Just stop, catch your breath, and get some tea, and then see if you really want to eat some more.
Yeah. Okay, so how he ended this chapter reminded me of you.
Oh, dear.
No, in a good way.
Oh,
I mean,
yeah.
I've heard you say something like this. He says, let me get to it. Mm-hmm. If I have offended your sensibilities because I didn't say your diet was the best diet, I have one final piece of advice. Stop overthinking nutrition so much. Put the book down, go outside, and exercise.
Absolutely, yeah. And he keeps talking about. He earlier in the book he talks about the emotional attachment to the way we eat. I am keto, and that's the only way you're going to be healthy. Or I am paleo, or I am all these ideas about how to eat, and people just form these tribes of intensity around this and obsess about it. He says, this is not good for us.
No. And, I do appreciate how he says, well, I have tried this approach in the past.
And he did.
I have reformed my thinking.
I loved it. I loved it.
Yes. Thank you for that, Peter.
Yes, that was wonderful. He also, as an MD, says there are things that can be monitored. And I come from some of the science background. I want to see the numbers and the data. Mm-hmm. So he is suggesting that we do ask for tests if our doctors are not doing them, like the DEXA scan for your fat. He's more interested in visceral fat than subcutaneous fat. And then a calcium scan could be helpful, and as a baseline to see if calcium is coming up. He talks about uric acid levels being interesting to measure. He also talks about C-reactive protein, homocysteine, ALT for liver function, triglycerides, HDL, LDL, insulin, because he is concerned about non-alcoholic fatty livers and those sorts of things that are quiet. They are happening to people and they don't know it. And once that continues over the chronic journey, you're in worse health than you might have been.
I would love to have doctors' opinions on this.
I would too.
I would love.
You're married
love,
to one.
love
Did you ask him?
Yeah, my husband is very by the book, and I think he 100% disagrees with Peter's ask your doctor for these labs.
Oh, I think so too. I would say that is not the way medicine is practiced, because the medical doctor has the expertise to say this is the appropriate test for what we're looking for.
Right.
You as an individual out here, you don't have that context. So I see there could be a struggle there, but I think it is interesting. And I do think some of these functional medical docs may be more open to that than the standard non-integrative practitioner.
Yeah.
Because they tend to do a more screening panel. I've not been to one, but I have. Maybe I should go and find out. Do you have any?
Panel?
Yeah, I mean, they're. I hear, the hormonal thing. There are practitioners out there that are saying things that I still hesitate over, because they're running tests that look like they're legitimate blood work tests, and interpretation may or may not be conforming with what I understand.
Yeah.
And that may be where your husband is as well.
Yeah. Yeah, it's an interesting line, isn't it?
Yeah, but I think we will get more as we go forward. And we have an informed public, and we have a better relationship with our providers.
Right. I don't think we should go in demanding these
I don't either.
tests.
Well, and that's
and we can ask about them.
Well, I worry about the ads on TV where they say, Keytruda, it's a cancer therapy. Go ask your doctor about it, and don't take it if you have liver problems. I'm going, wouldn't my doctor know this?
That's what I say. Tell your doctor if you suffer from this. Well, my doctor should already know
that.
Yes.
Yeah.
Why am I telling my doctor
what to do?
What to do?
Yeah.
And that's the pressure from Big Pharma.
I have no medical training at all.
I'm coming to you for your expertise.
Yeah.
Well, a potential guest idea. We have a couple of providers in our community here in the Winston Clemens area that do provide medicine. It's not, what's the word? It's not related to the hospital, but it's not concierge medicine either.
Fee for service?
That's not what I'm looking for, but basically that's it, right? Independent doctors. I would love to have them on the show and hear their 2 cents about some of these things. So
Well,
maybe an
we could-
idea for later.
Yep. And I know we're kind of running out of time maybe, but I don't want us to ignore what I thought was the surprise of the book. We get to the end of all of this after he's been through all this stuff about cancer and cardiovascular disease and metabolic dysfunction, which we could talk more about if you want to.
Yeah, and then he's got a chapter on sleep.
Yeah, well, then he gets to emotional health. And then it's like, zing. Wow, does he open up a whole different journey of his that is so revealing. And I applaud him for his openness.
100%.
Because he crashes and burns, basically, and ends up in recovery, which is a journey for a lot of us. And he's very open about how that's an important thing to acknowledge and it's okay to ask for help, but that our emotional health is underneath all of this. And so many of us have experienced trauma, and he didn't even know he'd experienced trauma. And that was the surprise, is that through this erratic behavior that he began to exhibit, and dangerous behavior, and the fear of maybe losing his family, his business, everything, friends stepped in and helped him come to the conclusion, I need help. And he got it.
Yeah. Oh, well, I agree with you 100% that I applaud him for including this chapter, and so very important. And it also called to attention that the concept of longevity, or maybe nutrition or sleep, whatever it is, can become obsessive. And I think part of this crazy part of his career was being obsessed with this work, obsessed with being this type of doctor, obsessed with knowing everything about longevity. And I think that's
He's an overachiever. I mean,
an overachiever.
Stanford, Johns Hopkins,
Yes.
NIH, yeah.
And
oncology surgeon. Oh,
and I think that's important to realize that
he's amazing.
he was there and he got himself out of that. But
Yeah, but
like, you don't want to be obsessed with longevity per se.
yeah. Well, he also says, what good is it? He has a more vigorous way of saying it. But what good is it to live long if your life sucks?
Yeah, if you're unhappy.
Yeah. What is that about?
So he was really unhappy and just trying to hide it with his work. And
Yeah. And on that trauma thing, since we have read several books in that genre about anxiety and depression and what's causing that, and
have some
what happened to
upcoming.
you?
Mhm.
Yeah. What happened? Is that the one?
What happened to you?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the idea of generational trauma, which is kind of new to some people, the idea that things that have happened in earlier generations affect us now.
Yeah.
And I think we are learning more about how that happens. But he talks about abuse as a type of trauma, neglect as a type of trauma, abandonment as a type of trauma, enmeshment or not blurring of boundaries, and then witnessing a tragic event. And that we have maladaptive behaviors to deal with that. And that includes addiction, codependence, habitual survival strategies, and attachment disorder. And those are not so easily identified. And that's what happened to him. He was living this pretty long, into his fourth or fifth decade before he realized he had maladapted and was successful at it and minimized things and didn't appreciate that they were not good things to have happened, and he had to deal with it. And it took him 2 journeys into recovery to find it.
Yeah, he didn't really delve too much about what was happening within his family, other than he was working a lot and not there for his family.
Oh, don't you remember he said that his 1-month-old baby
Oh,
stopped
that's
breathing,
right.
and his wife calls him and says, the baby's, we got it resuscitated, but we're going to the hospital. He says, well, just call me back later after the docs. I'll talk to the docs. It took him 10 days
To get back home
to that
see
baby.
that baby.
He says it makes him nauseous to this day to know that he treated his family that way. I mean, that's like red flags. But he didn't see them.
He didn't. And his friends and family had to point it out a couple of times.
Yeah, it's like awful.
And he was so resistant. I mean, his story is so honest
Honest.
and raw. I appreciate it. A lot of people might relate to, being in denial of not having this emotional health intact.
But just surviving.
And to survive, yeah.
And that they've done it. They're surviving.
The adapting that
But
you
his
talked about.
point is, you can't have total health, total wellness, unless you're looking at your nourishment and all those other sleep and things. But don't ignore your emotional health, and it may take more time than you want it to take. But get in there and explore it.
It's a good thing that he talks about going through and healing your trauma, because we talk about social health and the importance of relationships, but we haven't really gotten into, outside of that, what happened to you book about like healing your trauma. It's not just having relationships, it's having that healthy relationship with yourself first. Such an important end to the book. It really is.
It is a well-researched book. It has a tremendous bibliography. It's got an index, and there's more in here than we can talk about on this podcast. I think there's something in here for all of us. So if you buy this book and choose to read it, pick and choose the parts you want, or take it from beginning to end and enjoy it.
And I'll say that I have the physical copy and I listened on Audible.
Oh, did
because
you?
sometimes I just have to do both.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And I liked hearing him read it. It's nice.
Yeah. I always feel like they're in my car with me or whatever, and there's just my best friend, and now I know them. And he knows a lot of our friends, because actually I saw he referenced things that we have read about in Why We Sleep, Glucose Revolution, No Sweat, Telomere Effect, Blue Zones, Chatter, Breath, remember the one on breathing? Forest bathing, break up with your phone. I mean, he knows our tribe.
I thought that how comprehensive this is. Like, if you've listened to the Health Geeks Book Club podcast and you haven't read any of those books, maybe start here, because it is so comprehensive.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Good job, Peter.
All right.
Happy reading.
Health Geeks Book Club is part of the Less Desirables Podcast Network, where you can listen to our podcast as well as the Less Desirables, Man Away to Town, Beeswax Final Daily, and other podcasts like Panty Pan and things like that. You can listen to our podcast on our website or any podcatcher of your choice, like Apple Podcasts or Spotify, basically anywhere you find podcasts. And of course, on the Less Desirables Podcast Network, TLDpodnetwork.com. Find all you need to know right there, TLDpodnetwork.com. If you have something to say to us, you can email comments@healthgeekpodcast.com. Look us up on our social channels, and if you want to be really cool, call and leave a voicemail at 336-422-6862. We will play that voicemail on the air.
And opinions stated in this podcast are solely those of the contributors and are not necessarily those of our distributors or hosting company. This podcast is copyrighted, and no part can be reproduced without the expressed written consent of Kristen and Eleanor.